is it the case that when people are anxious, their movements do become very stiff and jerky, that somehow something about the control of the movement changes? And that's one of the reasons I decided to pursue this line of investigation.
In Corbin's experiment, reflective markers are placed over the subject's body. These relay the relative position of his limbs to a computer for processing.
On my mark, 3, 2, 1, go.
The data is used to calculate the smoothness of his movements.
What we've been doing in the laboratory is training people up on a variety of tasks, and in particular we've looked at a footballer. We asked them to kick the ball under normal conditions and collected information on their kinematics or their movements. We've then placed them under some sort of stress and observed changes in their kinematics and compared them to their kinematics or their movements under these normal conditions.
For the anxiety phase of the experiment, the player was simply told his performance would be rated by an expert panel. Corbin wanted to find out if the player's movements would become less expert under pressure. And sure enough, he couldn't even hit the goal.
What we've found thus far is that what seems to happen is that under anxiety conditions, their behaviour or their kinematics or their movements become less variable, and that is, their movements are not as fluid, more stiff or rigid, and also that their movements resemble those observed when they were learning the task.
Anxiety makes a footballer's movements less flowing, and it's all down to how their brain works.
When we learn a task, a particular part of the brain seems to be more involved in the control of the action. And as we become more expert at the task, a different part of the brain becomes more active in the control of that movement.
When learning a new skill, a player has to think hard about what they're doing, and their movements are controlled by a conscious thinking area of the brain called the ventral stream. Once the player is expert at the task, their movements become second nature and are now controlled by a different and subconscious area of the brain called the dorsal stream. Dr. Corbin believes anxiety reactivates the conscious part of the brain to turn what should be a subconscious expert movement into one which is clumsy and amateurish.
And that is why we think choking occurs. That is, this ventral stream all of a sudden becomes more dominant, and you tend to think too much about what you're doing rather than just letting the motor system control the movements automatically as it would usually.
And that's why even professionals can get it so wrong.
If you look at that clip, you'll notice he looks as if he was very anxious, and quite rightly so. But then if you look at his actual kick, the kick just looks awkward, it looks forced, and there we might have a classic example of how this increased level of anxiety has had a negative consequence on the control of his action, resulting in a poor performance.